Chapter 6, Part 4 of Melmoth the Wanderer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kendra Lee Oberhauser, Berkeley, California. KendraLeeOberhauser.com. Melmoth the Wanderer by Charles Robert Maturin. Chapter 6, Part 4. The monks crossed themselves, and as I left the apartment, repeated, "But how, then? What if we prevented this mischief?" "By what means?" "By any that the interests of religion may suggest. The character of the convent is at stake. The bishop is a man of strict and scrutinizing character. He will keep his eyes open to the truth. He will inquire into the facts." "What will become of us?" "Were it not better that—" "What?" "You comprehend us." "And if I dared to comprehend you, the time is too short." "We have heard of the death of maniacs being very sudden, of—" "What do you dare to hint at?" "Nothing, only we spoke of what every one knows, that a profound sleep is often a restorative to lunatics. He is a lunatic, as all the convent are ready to swear. A wretch possessed by the infernal spirit, whom he invocates every night in his cell. He disturbs the whole convent by his outcries." The superior all this time walked impatiently up and down his apartment. He entangled his fingers in his rosary. He threw on the monks angry looks from time to time. At last he said, "I am myself disturbed by his cries, his wanderings, his undoubted commerce with the enemy of souls. I need rest. I require a profound sleep to repair my exhausted spirits. What would you prescribe?" Several pressed forward, not understanding the hint, and eagerly recommended the common opiates. Mithridate, etc., etc. An old monk whispered in his ear, "Laudanum. It will procure a deep and sound sleep. Try it, my father, if you want rest. But to make the experiment sure, were it not best to try it first on another?" The superior nodded, and the party were about to disperse, when the superior caught the old monk by his habit and whispered, "But no murder." "Oh, no, only profound sleep." "What matter when he wakes? It must be to suffering in this life or the next. We are not guilty in the business. What signifies a few moments sooner or later?" The superior was of a timid and passionate character. He still kept hold of the monk's habit. He whispered, "But it must not be known." "But who can know it?" At this moment the clock struck, and an old ascetic monk, who occupied a cell adjacent to the superior's, and who had accustomed himself to the exclamation, "God knoweth all things," whenever the clock struck, repeated it aloud. The superior quitted his hold of the monk's habit. The monk crawled to his cell, God-struck, if I may use the expression. The laudanum was not administered that night. The voice did not return. I slept the entire night, and the whole convent was delivered from the harassings of the infernal spirit. Alas, none haunted it, but that spirit which the natural malignity of solitude raises within the circle of every heart, and forces us, from the terrible economy of misery, to feed on the vitals of others, that we may spare our own. This conversation was repeated to me afterwards by a monk who was on his dying bed. He had witnessed it, and I have no reason to doubt his sincerity. In fact, I always considered it as rather a palliation than an aggravation of their cruelty to me. They had made me suffer worse than many deaths. The single suffering would have been instantaneous. The single act would have been mercy. The next day, the visit of the bishop was expected. There was an indescribable kind of terrified preparation among the community. This house was the first in Madrid, and the singular circumstance of the son of one of the highest families in Spain having entered it in early youth, having protested against his vows in a few months, having been accused of being in a compact with the infernal spirit a few weeks after, the hope of a scene of exorcism, the doubt of the success of my appeal, the probable interference of the Inquisition, the possible festival of an auto da fe, had set the imagination of all Madrid on fire, and never did an audience long more for the drawing up of the curtain at a popular opera than the religious and irreligious of Madrid did for the development of the scene which was acting at the convent of the ex-Jesuits. In Catholic countries, sir, religion is the national drama. The priests are the principal performers, the populace the audience, and whether the piece concludes with a Don Giovanni plunging in flames, or the beatification of a saint, the applause and the enjoyment is the same. I feared my destiny was to be the former. I knew nothing of the bishop, and hoped nothing from his visit, but my hopes began to rise in proportion to the visible fears of the society. I argued, with the natural malignity of wretchedness, if they tremble, I may exult. When suffering is thus weighed against suffering, the hand is never steady. We are always disposed to make the balance incline a little on our own side. The bishop came early, and passed some hours with the superior in his own apartment. During this interval, there was a stillness in the house that was strongly contrasted with its previous agitation. I stood alone in my cell. Stood, for I had no seat left me. I said to myself, this event bodes neither good or evil to me. I am not guilty of what they accuse me of. They can never prove it. An accomplice with Satan? The victim of diabolical delusion? Alas, my only crime is my involuntary subjugation to the delusions they have practiced on me. This man, this bishop, cannot give me freedom, but he may at least do me justice. All this time the community were in a fever. The character of the house was at stake. My situation was notorious. They had labored to represent me as a possessed being beyond their walls, and to make me appear as one within them. The hour of trial approached. For the honor of human nature, from the dread of violating decency, from the dread of apparently violating truth, I will not attempt to relate the means they had recourse to the morning of the bishop's visitation, to qualify me to perform the part of a possessed, insane, and blasphemous wretch. The 4 monks I have before mentioned were the principal executioners, I must call them so, under pretense that there was no part of my person which was not under the influence of the demon. This was not enough. I was deluged almost to suffocation with aspersions of holy water. Then followed, etc. The result was that I remained half naked, half drowned, gasping, choking, and delirious with rage, shame, and fear, when I was summoned to attend the bishop, who, surrounded by the superior and the community, awaited me in the church. This was the moment they had fixed on. I yielded myself to them. I said, stretching out my arms, yes, drag me naked, mad. Religion and nature alike violated in my abused figure before your bishop. If he speaks truth, if he feels conscience, woe be to you, hypocritical, tyrannical wretches. You have half driven me mad, half murdered me by the unnatural cruelties you have exercised on me. And in this state you drag me before the bishop? Be it so. I must follow you. As I uttered these words, they bound my arms and legs with ropes, carried me down, and placed me at the door of the church, standing close to me. The bishop was at the altar, the superior near him. The community filled the choir. They flung me down like a heap of carrion, and retreated, as if they fled from the pollution of my touch. This sight struck the bishop, He said in a loud voice, "Rise, unhappy, and come forward." I answered, in a voice whose tones appeared to thrill him, "Bid them unbind me, and I will obey you." The bishop turned a cold and yet indignant look on the superior, who immediately approached and whispered him. This whispering consultation was carried on for some time, but, though lying on the ground, I could perceive the bishop shook his head at every whisper of the superior, and the end of the business was an order to unbind me. I did not fare much the better for this order, for the 4 monks were still close to me. They held my arms as they led me up the steps to the altar. I was then, for the first time, placed opposite to the bishop. He was a man, the effect of whose physiognomy was as indelible as that of his character. The one left its impress on the senses as strongly as the other did on the soul. He was tall, majestic, and hoary. Not a feeling agitated his frame. Not a passion had left its trace on his features. He was a marble statue of episcopacy, chiseled out by the hand of Catholicism, a figure magnificent and motionless. His cold black eyes did not seem to see you when they were turned on you. His voice, when it reached you, did not address you, but your soul. Such was his exterior. For the rest, his character was unimpeachable, his discipline exemplary, his life that of an anchorite hewed out in stone. But he was partially suspected of what is called liberality in opinions, that is, an inclination to Protestantism, and the sanctity of his character went bail in vain for this imputed heterodoxy, which the bishop could hardly redeem by his rigid cognizance of every conventual abuse in his district, among which my convent happened to be. Such was the man before whom I stood. At the command to unloose me, the superior shewed much agitation, but the command was positive, and I was released. I was then between the 4 monks, who held me, and I felt that my appearance must have justified the impression he had received. I was ragged, famished, livid, and on fire, with the horrible treatment I had just received. I hoped, however, that my submission to whatever was to be performed might, in some degree, redeem the opinion of the bishop. He went with evident reluctance through the forms of exorcism, which were delivered in Latin, while all the time the monks crossed themselves, and the acolytes were not sparing of holy water and incense. Whenever the terms diabole te adjuro occurred, the monks who held me twisted my arms so that I appeared to make contortions and uttered cries of pain. This at first seemed to disturb the bishop, but when the form of exorcism was over, he commanded me to approach the altar alone. I attempted to do so, but the 4 monks surrounding me made it appear an act of great difficulty. He said, "Stand apart, let him alone." They were compelled to obey. I advanced alone, trembling. I knelt. The bishop, placing his stole on my head, demanded, "Did I believe in God and the Holy Catholic Church?" Instead of answering, I shrieked, flung off the stole, and trampled in agony on the steps of the altar. The bishop retreated, while the superior and the rest advanced. I collected courage as I saw them approach, and, without uttering a word, pointed to the pieces of broken glass which had been thrown on the steps where I stood, and which had pierced me through my torn sandals. The bishop instantly ordered a monk to sweep them away with the sleeve of his tunic. The order was obeyed in a moment, and the next I stood before him without fear or pain. He continued to ask, "Why do you not pray in the church?" "Because its doors are shut against me." "How? What is this?" "A memorial is in my hands urging many complaints against you, and this among the first, that you do not pray in the church." I have told you the doors of the church are shut against me. Alas, I could do no more, open them, than I could open the hearts of the community. Everything is shut against me here." He turned to the superior, who answered, "The doors of the church are always shut to the enemies of God." The bishop said, with his usual stern calmness, "I am asking a plain question. Evasive and circuitous answers will not do. Have the doors of the church been shut against this wretched being? Have you denied him the privilege of addressing God?" "I did so, because I thought and believed—" "I ask not what you thought or believed. I ask a plain answer to a matter-of-fact question. Did you, or did you not, deny him access to the house of God?" "I had reason to believe that—" "I warn you, these answers may compel me to make you exchange situations in one moment with the object you accuse. Did you, or did you not, shut the doors of the church against him? Answer yes or no." The superior, trembling with fear and rage, said, "I did, and I was justified in doing so. That is for another tribunal to judge, but it seems you plead guilty to the fact of which you accuse him." The superior was dumb. The bishop then, examining his paper, addressed me again. "How is it that the monks cannot sleep in their cells from the disturbance you cause?" "I know not. You must ask them." "Does not the evil spirit visit you nightly? Are not your blasphemies, your execrable impurities, disgorged even in the ears of those who have the misfortune to be placed near you? Are you not the terror and the torment of the whole community?" I answered, "I am what they have made me. I do not deny. There are extraordinary noises in my cell, but they can best account for them. I am assailed by whispers close to my bedside. It seems these whispers reach the ears of the brethren, for they burst into my cell and take advantage of the terror with which I am overwhelmed, to put the most incredible constructions on it." "Are there no cries, then, heard in your cell at night?" "Yes, cries of terror, cries uttered not by one who is celebrating infernal orgies, but dreading them." "But the blasphemies, the imprecations, the impurities, which proceed from your lips?" "Sometimes, in irrepressible terror. I have repeated the sounds that were suggested to my ears, but it was always with an exclamation of horror and aversion, that proved these sounds were not uttered, but echoed by me, as a man may take up a reptile in his hand and gaze on its hideousness a moment, before he flings it from him. I take the whole community to witness the truth of this. The cries I uttered, the expressions I used, were evidently those of hostility to the infernal suggestions which had been breathed into my ears. Ask the whole community. They must testify that when they broke into my cell, they found me alone, trembling, convulsed. That I was the victim of those disturbances, they affected to complain of. And though I never was able to guess the means by which this persecution was effected, I am not rash in ascribing it to the hands that covered the walls of my cell with representations of demons, the traces of which still remain. "You were also accused of having burst into the church at midnight, defaced the images, trampled on the crucifix, and performed all the acts of demon violating the sanctuary." At this accusation, so unjust and cruel, I was agitated beyond control. I exclaimed, I flew to the church for protection in a paroxysm of terror which their machinations had filled me with. I flew there at night, because it was shut against me during the day, as you have discovered. I prostrated myself before the cross instead of trampling on it. I embraced the images of the blessed saints instead of violating them. And I doubt whether prayers more sincere were ever offered within these walls than those I uttered that night amid helplessness, terror, and persecutions. "Did you not obstruct and deter the community next morning by your cries, as they attempted to enter the church?" I was paralyzed from the effects of lying all night on the stone pavement where they had flung me. I attempted to rise and crawl away at their approach, and a few cries of pain were extorted from me by the efforts to do so, efforts rendered more painful by their refusing to offer me the slightest assistance. In a word, the whole is a fabrication. I flew to the church to implore for mercy, and they represent it as the outrages of an apostate spirit. Might not the same arbitrary and absurd construction be put on the daily visits of multitudes of afflicted souls who weep and groan audibly as I did? If I attempted to overturn the crucifix, to deface the images, would not the marks of this violence remain? Would they not have been preserved with care to substantiate the accusations against me? Is there a trace of them? There is not. There cannot be, because they never existed. The bishop paused. An appeal to his feelings would have been vain, but this appeal to facts had its full effect. After some time he said, "You can have no objection, then, to render before the whole community the same homage to the representations of the Redeemer and the holy saints that you say it was your purpose to render them that night?" "None." A crucifix was brought me, which I kissed with reverence and unction, and prayed, while the tears streamed from my eyes, an interest in the infinite merits of the sacrifice it represented. The bishop said, "Make a deed of faith, of love, of hope." I did so, and though they were extempore, my expressions, I could perceive, made the dignified ecclesiastics who attended on the bishop cast on each other looks in which were mingled compassion, interest, and admiration. The bishop said, "Where did you learn those prayers?" "My heart is my only teacher. I have no other. I am allowed no book." "How? Recollect what you say." "I repeat, I have none. They have taken away my breviary, my crucifix. They have stripped my cell of all its furniture. I kneel on the floor. I pray from the heart. If you deign to visit my cell, you will find I have told you the truth." At these words, the bishop cast a terrible look on the superior. He recovered himself, however, immediately, for he was a man unaccustomed to any emotion, and felt it at once a suspension of his habits and an infringement of his rank. In a cold voice, he bid me retire. Then, as I was obeying him, he recalled me. My appearance, for the first time, seemed to strike him. He was a man so absorbed in the contemplation of that waveless and frozen tide of duty in which his mind was anchored, without fluctuation, progress, or improvement, that physical objects must be presented before him a long time before they made the least impression on him. His senses were almost ossified. Thus he had come to examine a supposed demoniac. But he had made up his mind that there must be injustice and imposture in the case, and he acted in the matter with a spirit, decision, and integrity that did him honor. But all the time, the horror and misery of my appearance, which would have made the first impression on a man whose feelings were all external, made the last. They struck him as I slowly and painfully crawled from the steps of the altar, and the impression was forcible in proportion to its slowness. He called me back and inquired, as if he saw me for the first time, "How is it your habit is so scandalously ragged?" At these words I thought I could disclose a scene that would have added to the superior's humiliation, but I only said, "It is the consequence of the ill treatment I have experienced." Several other questions of the same kind, relating to my appearance, which was deplorable enough, followed, and at last I was forced to make a full discovery. The bishop was incensed at the detail more than was credible. Rigid minds, when they yield themselves to emotion, do it with a vehemence inconceivable, for to them everything is a duty, and passion, when it occurs, among the rest, Perhaps the novelty of emotion, too, may be a delightful surprise to them. More than all this was the case now with the good bishop, who was as pure as he was rigid, and shrunk with horror, disgust, and indignation at the detail I was compelled to give, which the superior trembled at my uttering, and which the community dared not to contradict. He resumed his cold manner, for to him feeling was an effort, and rigor a habit, and he ordered me again to retire. I obeyed, and went to my cell. The walls were as bare as I had described them, but, even contrasted with all the splendor and array of the scene in the church, they seemed emblazoned with my triumph. A dazzling vision passed before me for a moment, then all subsided, and in the solitude of my cell I knelt and implored the Almighty to touch the bishop's heart and impress on him the moderation and simplicity with which I had spoken. As I was thus employed, I heard steps in the passage. They ceased for a moment, and I was silent. It appeared that persons overheard me and paused, and these few words, uttered in solitude, made, I found, a deep impression on them. A few moments after, the bishop, with some dignified attendants, followed by the superior, entered my cell. The former all stopped, horror-struck at its appearance. I have told you, sir, that my cell now consisted of 4 bare walls and a bed. It was a scandalous, degrading sight. I was kneeling in the middle of the floor, God knows, without the least idea of producing an effect. The bishop gazed around him for some time, while the ecclesiastics who attended him testified their horror by looks and attitudes that needed no interpretation. The bishop, after a pause, turned to the superior. "Well, what do you say to this?" The superior hesitated, and at last said, "I was ignorant of this." "That is false," said the bishop, "and even if it was true, it would be your crimination, not your apology. Your duty binds you to visit the cells every day. How could you be ignorant of the shameful state of this cell without neglecting your own duties?" He took several turns about the cell, followed by the ecclesiastics, shrugging their shoulders, and throwing on each other looks of disgust. The superior stood dismayed. They went out, and I could hear the bishop say in the passage, "All this disorder must be rectified before I quit the house." And the superior, "You are unworthy of the situation you hold. You ought to be deposed." And he added, in severer tones, "Catholics, monks, Christians, this is shocking, horrible. Tremble for the consequences of my next visit, if the same disorders exist. I promise you it shall be repeated soon." He then returned, and standing at the door of my cell, said to the superior, "Take care that all the abuses committed in this cell are rectified before tomorrow morning." The superior signified his submission to this order in silence. That evening I went to sleep on a bare mattress between 4 dry walls. I slept profoundly, from exhaustion and fatigue. I awoke in the morning, far beyond the time for matins, and found myself surrounded by all the comforts that can be bestowed on a cell. As if magic had been employed during my sleep, crucifix, breviary, desk, table, everything was replaced. I sprung from bed, and actually gazed in ecstasy around my cell. As the day advanced, and the hour for refection approached, my ecstasy abated, and my terrors increased. It is not easy to pass from extreme humiliation and utter abhorrence to your former state in the society of which you are a member. When the bell rung, I went down. I stood at the door for a moment. Then, with an impulse like despair, I entered and took my usual place. No opposition was made, not a word was said. The community separated after dinner. I watched for the toll of the bell for vespers. I imagined that would be decisive. The bell tolled at last. The monks assembled. I joined them without opposition. I took my place in the choir. My triumph was complete, and I trembled at it. Alas! In what moment of success do we not feel sensation of terror? Our destiny always acts the part of the ancient slave to us, who was required every morning to remind the monarch that he was a man, and it seldom neglects to fulfill his own predictions before the evening. 2 days passed away. The storm that had so long agitated us seemed to have sunk into a sudden calm. I resumed my former place. I performed the customary duties. No one congratulated or reviled me. They all seemed to consider me as one beginning monastic life de novo. I passed 2 days of perfect tranquillity, and I take God to witness I enjoyed this triumph with moderation. I never reverted to my former situation. I never reproached those who had been agents in it. I never uttered a syllable on the subject of the visitation, which had made me and the whole convent change places in the space of a few hours, and the whole oppressed take the part, if he pleased, of the oppressor. I bore my success with temperance, for I was supported by the hope of liberation. The superior's triumph was soon to come. On the third morning, I was summoned to the parlour, where a messenger put into my hands a packet containing, as I well understood, the result of my appeal. This, according to the rules of the convent, I was compelled to put first into the hands of the superior to read, before I was permitted to read it myself. I took the packet, and slowly walked to the superior's apartment. As I held it in my hand, I considered it, felt every corner, weighed it over and over again in my hand, trying to catch an omen from its very shape. Then a withering thought crossed me, that, if its intelligence was auspicious, the messenger would have put it into my hands with an air of triumph, that, in spite of convent etiquette, I might break open the seals which enclosed the sentence of my liberation. We are very apt to take our presages from our destination, and mine being that of a monk, no wonder its auguries were black, and were verified. I approached the superior's cell with the packet. I knocked, was desired to enter, and, my eyes cast down, could only distinguish the hems of many habits, whose wearers were all assembled in the superior's apartment. I offered the packet with reverence. The superior cast a careless eye over it, and then flung it on the floor. One of the monks approached to take it up. The superior exclaimed, "Hold! Let him take it up." I did so, and retired to my cell, making first a profound reverence to the superior. I then went to my cell, where I sat down with the fatal packet in my hands. I was about to open it, when a voice from within me seemed to say, "It is useless. You must know the contents already." It was some hours before I perused it. It contained the account of the failure of my appeal. It seemed, from the detail, that the advocate had exerted his abilities, zeal, and eloquence to the utmost, and that, at one time, the court had been near deciding in favor of my claims, but the precedent was reckoned too dangerous. The advocate on the other side had remarked, "If this succeeds, we shall have all the monks in Spain appealing against their vows." Could a stronger argument have been used in favor of my cause? An impulse so universal must surely originate in nature, justice, and truth. On reverting to the disastrous issue of his appeal, the unfortunate Spaniard was so much overcome that it was some days before he could resume his narrative. End of Chapter 6, Part 4. Recording by Kendra Lee Oberhauser, Berkeley, California.